online. Google just had an issue this month, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. Arsenic had found an issue where he actually created a feed, and in the link tag, he had just done a pop-up to initially smoke test it, and they were affected as well. When I actually initially smoke tested Google Reader, and I forgot to put it in there. So I tested a bunch of local readers. An example of local readers, there's actually an application, people have heard of like Feed Daemon or Sharp Reader or RSS Readers. Actually, if you type RSS Reader into Google, there's actually an application called RSS Reader that's #1. A lot of them used browser components. A lot of them essentially used IE to render the feed because it was just easy to deal with, and a lot of people actually went that route. So the entity injection, a lot of the times they download the feed, and when I created a feed that had HTML entities instead of the literal tags, they would convert that, and then they would take that data, and then they'd shoot that into the browser view, and they didn't take into consideration some of the things that may be in there. Different readers had different context. Like RSS Reader, which is the name of it, which I'll demo shortly, that particular application downloaded the feed, took the data out of the feed, saved it to an HTML file in the file system, and then they loaded that into IE, which now you're in the local zone. So now you can do things like access ActiveX objects to like copy files off to remote hosts, do some other evil things. Now, the remote zone doesn't have access to the file system intentionally. Usually it'll be like a browser bug which will allow that to happen. It's pretty much you can only do things to the existing site that you're on. You can't access things on the file system because of the security restrictions that people have agreed upon with the different types of browsers. Now, because specifically with like cross-site request forgery, let's say that I have my local reader and I download a feed. And in that feed I have either JavaScript or an image source tag that will send a request to an offsite host. It's possible that an attacker could provide a URL that's actually an attack against another site. So as an example, maybe if you hit a certain URL, the site acts slowly. So what they do, they stick it in their feed, and everybody who downloads that feed, so now you maybe got between 100 or 5,000 people, or even more if it's like Slashshot or something like that. And every single time people view these feeds that have a vulnerable client, they're all hitting this site. So you kind of have a distributed method in order to kind of relay attacks to other sites. Now there is a potential for web form spam for this. A lot of technologies like CGI.pm module, basically the developer will be able to just say, give me a parameter. And it doesn't, they don't have to specify, get me the parameter from get or get me the parameter from post. In other words, a lot of forms online you'll use post in order to submit the data. However, you could convert that to get and send a request to that remote site. So it's possible that let's say there's an online forum, or let's say that there's a web form for somebody that you don't like. You could inject something into the feed, and everybody who's now viewing it is now sending email to this person and kind of overloading them. Another thing that you can do in the local zone is with XML HTTP, which commonly people refer that with AJAX. You pretty much, when you're viewing your current site, you're pretty much locked into sending requests to that current site, but when you're loading it off of the local file system, there is no restriction. So in a nutshell, if I download a feed and I'm in a local zone, it can now port scan my entire network. Possibly relay attacks, things like that. So I'm going to do a demonstration here of with RSS Reader, which is the name of the application, and this is a little piece of JavaScript that will read a file, test.txt from my local C root, and then it'll copy it off to a remote host as a parameter. Now this isn't optimized, I didn't base 64 the file or anything like that. This is just kind of to show you that you can forward it along. Now obviously you're not going to subscribe to a feed that's already vulnerable, you're going to subscribe to a feed and more than likely something's going to happen to it that will then relay attack. So I'm just going to kind of subscribe to a feed here that's innocent. So this is a good feed talking about drinking beer at DEF CON, so if I'm interested I could read more about that, but unfortunately there's no free beer at DEF CON, so that's not going to happen. So let's say I'm subscribed to this feed, it's a couple months later, the site owner's not malicious, but something happens so that either somebody hacks the machine, or perhaps this feed is actually from a blog or something like that, and a user has posted a malicious comment which has gotten into the feed. So right now, normal feed, everything's good. So I'm just kind of simulate somebody injecting an attack. I'm just going to update this. So let's just pretend that it's like a month or two's passed by. I'm just going to, this will periodically pull like every 10 hours or 15 hours, and some feeds like Atom allow you to specify how often it should be pulled. So just for the context of this, I'm just going to kind of force an update. So let's say that I'm, oh, this is an interesting news story here. People are familiar with this. Yes, it's an ActiveX warning. Yes, it's not automatically executing it. However, people open email attachments all the time, and we still have email viruses, right? I'm a clueless user. I just, I subscribe to CNN or something like that. Not that CNN is vulnerable or anything like that, but I'm a normal user. I don't know what this means. I'm just going to click yes. Just like when I open up an attachment, I click yes, and we have all these stupid email viruses roaming around. So as far as I'm concerned, nothing happened. But however, what actually happened was that you read that file off the local file system and then it sent it off to a remote host here. And you can see here it says this is the text within within text.txt, and this is a remote host that this got forwarded off to. So you can kind of see the potential here. And actually, this particular client, when you first boot up your machine, it'll load RSS reader upon start, and it will automatically present them with it before they even view the application. So as soon as the machine boots up, all they see is this warning, and they're going to click yes because they're not going to understand what the context of it is because users just don't know. Excuse me 1 second. So just in case the demo didn't work for some reason, I took a screenshot of it because that happens. And again, this is kind of the log entry. This is the Apache log entry of what the context of that file was. Here, now I'm not going to get too much into in regards to using XML HTTP to port scan backend networks. There's 2 talks today that are going to talk about that, and I don't really want to get into it, to be honest with you, but I just put an example of just sending a basic request off to a site. And here's kind of a diagram. First time I use Visio, so it's not too great. But in a nutshell, the user would be downloading the feed. Obviously, they'd be downloading it from within their corporate network, which they'd be able to get around that firewall because they're the one initiating it, so it's cool. The feed could contain JavaScript or VB script, depending on the reader, because a lot of readers will use IE components, so they'd be able to do VB script as well. And if somebody were to create JavaScript to kind of try to port scan the backend network, it would in fact work. And this is something that had been tested actually at the office. So you can see here that the user's machine is the one that's performing the scanning, and then they would be forwarding that off to an attacker, and it's possible they could get additional instructions like, oh, I found a web server. Okay, it's this web server. Oh, okay, here's an attack payload for that, and this could be totally transparent to the user where they wouldn't know that they're actually attacking their backend network just because they subscribe to some user blog feed. So website feed usage. This is actually a screenshot of the web security mailing list feed. A lot of people, again, they will download a feed from another site and then they will provide that on their own in order to do scrolling news, things like that. And they may not take into consideration the content within that. Once again, if I inject script into there and they're not looking at some of the data, now that script's on their site. Everybody viewing that site now has that script. And some of the things that you can do with it is, again, common, cross-site request origin cookie theft. You can also do keystroke logging, and that really will only work on the same exact page that's displayed. Excuse me. However, there are some sites that will display the feed on every single page in order to SEO boost their site, search engine optimization of their site. And actually, I put it on every page of my site, so I just kind of copied my site as an example here. And if it's on every single page and it contains the keylogging JavaScript, anything you type in on any single page, including you're logging in or you're searching for something on the site, every one of those things that you're doing will be recorded by an attacker potentially. So I'm not going to get into names of any specific sites, but there was one notable site that actually had downloaded a feed from a resource that I know of, and they took that feed and they put it on their website, and they filtered it on their website, but they also put it into their own feed, but they didn't take into consideration that they may be relaying attacks. And the user base of that particular website was rather large, into the thousands easily for that particular feed. So it's actually, a lot of people aren't, even people, and this is actually a security site, I'm not going to name it to be PC, but it happens to everybody. People just aren't taking into consideration where data is necessarily coming from before they're starting to use it. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention on the previous slide is that you may download the feed, put it in your own feed. Somebody may download your feed, put it into their feed, and kind of keep doing that process. And suddenly, an attacker injects something into a feed, and suddenly now potentially hundreds of websites, depending on how popular the feed is, of course, are now potentially relaying that attack for them. This is kind of an overview of all the different client types that were tested. A lot of them complained about literal tag injection, which was nice. However, the web-based readers, of course, were the primary people focused by that. The local readers, like RSS Reader or some of the other local clients that you would download, pretty much they were all affected by converting the HTML entities to HTML, and that's okay. However, when they presented that information through a browser component, it executed. And they didn't really take into consideration potentially disabling script execution when they're using that IE component, or disabling applets, or disabling other plugins and things like that. So here are some products affected. There's actually some more, but I'm currently working with a bunch of vendors, and I just want to respect them to allow them to fix this problem. So Bloglines obviously was affected. RSS Reader, which again, you Google RSS Reader and it's the #1 reader. RSS Owl, I'd spoken with that person in email, and they're not going to fix it, but they do have a workaround in order to disable in the settings the script execution, but they're not going to do it by default. Because one of the things to take into consideration is that some websites like Yahoo actually make a business on putting ads into an RSS feed. So you basically, if I run a blog or something, I can make money by putting a little piece of JavaScript in my feed when it gets generated, and that will be displayed to anybody who has this feed, and I can make money whenever they click on it. So some people are, I mean, it's okay. It's good and it's bad functionality depending on where you're going from. Some people are specifically counting on JavaScript execution to be there in order to function. So practical use case, I'm Mr. Evil and I post something to a blog, let's say, or a website, maybe like Slashdot or some forum or something like that. And maybe when they present my post on the website, they're filtering it, but they're just putting it literally into the feed. So I'm gonna do a demo in a moment regarding the keystroke logging, but excuse me one moment. As far as what an attacker would actually use this for, attackers want to either get botnets or they want to steal something from you usually. Definitely, the type of site that you're on, depending on the type of site that you have the viewer on, or the type of viewer that you have, they may want to take information from you, such as like credentials, things like that.